Muito bem. Então, boa tarde, pessoal. Antes do professor iniciar a aula dele, deixa eu só dar alguns rápidos avisos. A gente percebeu que, na verdade, ontem, apesar do Teams ter parado a gravação, né, depois de ter passado 4 horas, ele iniciou uma nova gravação. Então, a gente tem 2 gravações da aula de ontem, uma de 4 horas e outra de 17 minutos, tá bom? E hoje a gente vai tentar tomar cuidado, porque acho que é possível colocar tudo em uma só de 4 horas, é só pausar na hora do intervalo. Então, lembrem-se de assinar a chamada né, que a gente vai colocar. Deixa eu dar algumas instruções, talvez não ficou claro para algumas pessoas, né? Foi criado um QR Code, é só você apontar o seu celular com a câmera, daí você consegue assinar a chamada. É a mesma chamada de ontem, né? O mesmo link. E a gente também divulgou, compartilhamos o link no chat do Teams. Mas a palavra-chave ela vai mudar, né? Daí vocês têm que escolher o dia de hoje e colocar a palavra-chave do dia de hoje que a gente vai divulgar no final da aula. Certo? Então, vou começar aqui só a gravar. Já está gravando. Vou colocar aqui a apresentação para o professor e o professor já vai iniciar a aula.
Alguém dá bola? Quem não?
Okay. I'll try to do my best so that we don't run over the recording time of 4 hours. I think it's going to be slightly shorter, so I don't bore you to death. Following up on the basic forces that shape diversity, in this first lecture, we will touch on demography. And by demography, I mean 2 basic phenomena. Those that depend on population size, and we call that genetic drift, and the remodeling of genetic diversity that happens when 2 different populations come in contact through migration. So, what I plan to do in this first lecture, let's try and keep it below 1 hour of my talking time. Of course, if there's this discussion and questions, I'm happy to go on as long as you're happy to go on. So I'll try. So what I'm saying is that I'll try not to talk too much. So we'll talk about drift. Now there's this elusive, almost absent concept of effective population size that we will touch on and confront it with the actual number of humans, or supplies, of course, to any other species, and we call that census size. We'll talk also about special cases of drift, bottlenecks, founder effects, population subdivision. Then we will move on to gene flow, and that may be the genetic consequence of migration, and we will see in which cases migration entails gene flow at a significant level, something that may really matter. Yesterday, we already mentioned that by comparing mitochondrial DNA and the Y chromosome, we can describe sex-specific gene flow. And then when we have a small population and no gene flow, that's an isolated population, and we'll discuss a little bit about that. Genetic drift is basically a probabilistic statistical phenomenon. It has to do with the random genetic change that happens in the gamete lottery. in a population, you have individuals with their genotypes to produce gametes with containing the alleles in the genotypes of that individual, and then, of course, through sexual reproduction, those gametes will meet and will give rise to the next generation. So, and this is a basic statistical concept. There's the general population, there's a sample, and it is a sample of the gametes that will produce the next generation. Of course, the effect depends on sample size. This on population size. The bigger population is, the more faithful the next generation will reproduce, will mimic the previous one. If we have a smaller sample, it will deviate in random ways. So the key concept in drift is random. It's a random process. And in the next lecture, we will talk about selection, which is a directional process that goes in some direction. Drift doesn't. Drift goes completely at random. So here's the schematic of what I said. We have a number of individuals. They produce a gamete pool, which gives rise to the next generation, and so on and so forth. Again, this is a little bit redundant. In full statistician mode here, we have an urn with black balls and red balls. And if we draw 10 balls at random, then we will get larger deviations than if we drew, I don't know, 100 balls at random from the from the initial frequencies here of 50% black, 50% red. Hey, the question. And it's important that that we take into account that we know that we have models. That it's not just a verbal description, that we actually have. Yeah. That we have ways that we have ways in which we can we'll see that again. Point is, it's a random process. We don't know exactly how the allele frequencies will be in the following generation, but we can assign probabilities to each possible outcome, and we do that with a very basic probability distribution, which is the binomial distribution. This is if we have this is the distribution that we'll model that will describe what we just saw about the black balls and the red balls, and it's easy to demonstrate that if we have allele frequencies P and Q, where P plus Q equals 1, we have just 2 alleles, matching your regular SNP, and we take n alleles, a sample of n alleles. The probability that R will be of one kind and the rest will be of the other kind follows this binomial distribution, which is a combination of n elements taken R times P to the R and Q to the n minus r. So this is exactly the same. This is just the definition of this operation here. And in this case, little n sample size is twice the population size because we are imagining here a diploid organism. So what this tells us, and what the mathematical properties of the binomial distribution tell us, is that the expectation of this draw is that we will have exactly n times b. The R value with the highest probability is the absolute frequency. The absolute frequency is n times b. So if we plot these probability distributions, again, if we start with 0.5 and 100 gametes, how much will it be in the next generation? The highest probability will be that it will stay the same, but with some deviation. The highest probability is at 0.5, but many other values in between have non-negligible probabilities. So you will deviate at random in this here, but once it deviates, once it's no longer 0.5, then we have a new binomial distribution with a new expectation. The binomial distribution has no memory, so it has no natural trend to go back to 0.5. If we have a draw, if we play this lottery and the result is 0.6, then the expectation for the next generation is no longer 0.5 but 0.6. Of course, it can go back, or it can go even further up. And here we have an illustration of the same binomial distribution, now with an initial probability of 0.9, and here we're getting close to 1. We are assuming here, we are ignoring here mutation. Remember yesterday the values that are observed for mutation rates at a particular site. They are on the order of 10 to the minus 9. This is negligible, particularly in small populations with the changes in frequency entailed by treatment. So my point here is that once an allele is gone, it's gone almost forever until the next time that mutation recreates it again. So now this process in action, we start at 0.5, and we have here in the x-axis time in generations, and with a population of 100 gametes, 50 individuals, and and we have these random fluctuations that accumulate from generation to generation, and as children say, the floor is lava. Once you touch it, it's gone. This once this allele is gone forever until the next geological era when maybe mutation will create it again. But the ceiling is lava too. If the other allele is fixed, the same thing applies. Now, with a larger sample size, with a larger population size, you see that these fluctuations are shorter. they are closer to the mean. They stay closer to 0.5. And in 150 generations, that would be about 4,000 years, we haven't lost any of these 10 alleles. Of course, there will be, we can compute the probability of, for that to run these a million times. 1,000, getting narrower and narrower, these fluctuations, staying more faithful towards the 0.5. 10,000. Now we touch at most in thousands of years, we touch at most 0.6 or 0.4. But remember that the variance is quite different, but the mean stays the same. If we do this exercise in many replicates, the mean will stay at around 0.5. Here and here, if we average this, it comes to 0.5. If we average this, we come to 0.5. If we average this, it also comes to 0.5, because it is as likely that one allele will become fixed as the other one will be fixed. In the end, quite quickly, in half of the simulations, one allele will be fixed and the other will be lost. And in the other half of the simulations, it will be the other way around.
I think it's so interesting to see the trajectory of allele frequency. Which program did we use for doing
Excel?
in Excel?
Yeah, I programmed it myself. It's quite easy.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a function. There's a function in Excel that returns the probability of a binomial distribution. So it was applying over and over and over.
Okay.
Which is a lazy way of doing it. No, yeah, because you should have written code that then that I could run with different parameters, that it could be annotated, that I could share with others. So this is just quick and dirty. And we'll see though, that's in the section on selection, we'll see you'll see that there's program that does that. And we'll see the web address for it. So yeah, it's the same concept, fixation or loss. And the probability that one allele becomes fixed at the end, it's initial allele frequency. So if in the long run, if we start at a frequency of 80%, there's a 90% probability that this allele will become fixed. If we start at 20%, there's a 20% probability that this allele will become fixed. It has a 90% probability that it will be lost. So diversity is higher at 0.5. Genetic diversity is at its highest point when the allele frequency is 50%. It's in terms of informational theory, it's the frequency in which, well, there are it's less likely that we would have the same two alleles in an individual. It maximizes heterozygosity. But it is difficult to stay at 50%. at precisely 50%. Even here, we started with the maximum diversity, and in many cases, we are no longer at that maximum. And it's even worse here. We are here. Here we are at the minimum possible diversity. So here's a basic diversity understood as heterozygosity is eroded, is destroyed by drift. And so much so, if n is lower. So, in a sense, drift is the enemy of diversity. A larger population will tend to have a good frequencies that are closer to 50% and will have higher diversity. And in the last class today, we will see, and we maybe not exactly prove, but at least see where this equation comes from. That heterozygosity at a nucleotide level is 4 times m mu, where mu is the mutation rate. So the higher the population size, the higher heterozygosity will be in a very direct, in a very linear manner. We have all of this is derived under a number of assumptions known as the Wright-Fisher model of population genetics. First is our binary equilibrium. That is that there's no force that systematically alters allele frequencies, and that means no selection through random mating, because if we have assortative mating or anti-assortative mating, if you mate with someone who's genetically similar to you, this has the effect of increasing drift. This is like there were many different subpopulations in the population. So we are assuming that the random mating and here we have discrete generations. I could talk that there's initial generation, the third generation, second generation, and that I can model them in a discrete way. Look, I have first cousins that go from 25 to 70 years old. The oldest ones are already grandparents. The younger ones don't have any children. This is a practical example that in the real world, generations are not discrete. We don't all synchronize our reproduction in discrete generations. And I don't know if violating this assumption is that important. It just means that that probably the units that we should have in the x-axis rather than generations should be years, and then the modeling is a little bit more complex than this. But anyway, the general ideas stand. That drift is random, but it depends on population size. It depends on a population size that we call NE, called the effective population size. If we could measure the change, the random change of allele frequencies for time, we could try and estimate the population size. If we do it that way, we call that the effective population size, which is always way smaller than the real population, because relations overlap. So it means that not everyone is reproducing at the same time. This means it's another way of saying this is that, or compounds this, is that when there's a narrow window, relatively narrow window of age in which we humans reproduce. There's people in the population that's too young to reproduce or too old to reproduce. And these are not good, and they shouldn't be counted towards the effect, these random effects. A fraction of the population dies childless, and they should be discounted also in the population size in genetic terms, or in population genetic terms. And the number of offspring can be very different between individuals. This is something that probably has been converging in past societies. Imagine in traditional Europe, where access to marriage dependent on access to land, on having a job, on inheriting a farm, and so on. But you needed to have some wealth to be married. Depending on the society, it's the bride's wealth or the groom's wealth. It's the dowry, or it's the price for the bride price. No, the dowry, the money or the things that the family of the woman pays towards the marriage. Other societies, particularly pastoral societies, it's the man's family who buys the bride in units of cattle, for instance. So since access to wealth is unequal, access to reproduction used to be unequal in that sense. Or it would be extreme cases of polygamous societies, in which quite usually these were polygynous societies in which a man could have more than one wife. This usually meant that there were other men who didn't have any wife. More rarely, there are polyandrous societies in which women have more than one husband. Okay, all of these factors contribute to the fact that the effects of the random effects on population frequencies that we see are much stronger than we would expect if we counted every human. In fact, the effective population size of all humans put together is between 10 and 15,000. So because of this, but this even couldn't explain that, through generations, the effective population size can change. From one generation to the next, we can be more or fewer individuals reproducing. The compound effects of the compounded effects through generations behave not as the average of the population size, but it can be mathematically shown that you need to apply this formula, which is called the harmonic mean. The harmonic mean means that any bottleneck, that any occasion in which, any generation in which n has been particularly low, this has a huge disproportionate effect on risk, on the overall NE on NE through time. So that's why, if we estimate it from foreign view, from heterozygosity, the value we have for the human effective population size is between 10 and 15,000. This basically means that at some point in time, the number of humans reproducing were about 10 to 15,000, which can be quite early in human history. Here we have an example of these fluctuations in population size and how effective population size changes, and it stays quite flat because of this formula, because of the harmonic mean. So, there are special cases of drift. Sometimes there's invisible drift. I mentioned associative mating. Certainly, there's social associative mating. A figure that well, of course, there are demographers who know about that, but someday I was playing with data provided by the Spanish Institute for National Statistics, and you know that when you have a child, the father is kind of helpless. You can, of course, go to your wife, but there are certain tasks that you do. You go to the population register with all the forms and to declare the birth and so on and so forth, and register your name and so on, and this and that in Spain. In Iceland, for example, someone at the clinic presses a button and it's all done, and they automatically give you the identity card for the newborn. We are not Iceland, so there's some paperwork that you need to do. So, long way to arrive at the point is that then the National Institute for Statistics in Spain provides the so-called statistical microdata for births. For instance, the level of education of the fathers and the mothers. So in Spain, where mom has a PhD, in 40% of the cases, that also has a PhD. And of course, this is not what you're expecting. If there was random mating, because I don't know, less than 1% of the general population has a PhD. So this, I'm not saying it is the case. For example, of social population subdivision, it would affect genetics only if there was if PhDs were really genetically different, which we usually are not. So, but there are many reasons, and we will see some later on here, in which a population that apparently looks as one, that has one name, inhabitants one place. In reality, there are these mating networks that are not at all interconnected through all the population. But at some point, there are barriers to reproduction. Quite often it's quite often social. So then drift will add in each subgroup. And we will see more drift than we would expect given the population size. So we're not taking into account this subdivision. Bottlenecks are temporary restrictions in population size. They are fortunately a thing of the past. Famines where when crops fail, epidemics when an epidemic could wipe out a quarter of the population, natural disasters. So when the population recovers, it recovers from the survivors. And of course, this is a huge source then of genetic drift. And further effect, when it's quite similar to a bottleneck, but a bottleneck refers to a population that stays in place. A further effect is one, imagine what these do that they made when a population sort of sprouts and founds, a subset of that population founds another population. That's the further effect. But its effects in genetic terms, in terms of the amount of it, are similar.
And something here.
Yeah.
I see the bottleneck as a concept that generates a founder effect.
Yeah.
So the way they are connected.
Yeah, it's a founder effect in situ, in a sense.
The founder effect in situ.
We will see later on one example of a bottleneck in this sense. So in a founder effect, we have a subset of a population that creates a new population, and that, of course, is a subsample of the original population that will bring a little bit diversity. It might or it might not be random. Think, for instance, that there might have been alleles that gave resistance to an epidemic, and those, of course, will increase after an epidemic. But in most cases, that will be random. Here's the an illustration of bottleneck versus founder event. And these changes are most notorious when they produce a phenotype, particularly when they produce a disease phenotype. And for instance, we know about Huntington disease in the Afrikaners, in the population of South Africa of Dutch origin, and since it has clear symptoms and is a disease with a relatively late age of onset, and it's a dominant disease, so it can be easily followed through genealogy. And we know the name of the woman who introduced Huntington's disease to the Afrikaner population in South Africa, because the pedigree is respected. Oh yeah, because it's quite obvious. These are these seizures, the general degeneration, the dementia. So it's really a cruel disease, because you see that in your father and your mother, and you know that you have a 50% chance that you will end up like that. At the beginning, when the genetic cause was discovered and the genetic test was offered, it was done in such a reckless way that it caused some suicides.
Well,
Because they should have thought it first that that you have to do, yeah, you can offer genetic counseling, but with a huge psychological support first, during, and after the process. Otherwise, you end up with people that are really desperate, and probably there should have been a better reasoning with them of whether they really wanted to know. And this is in my memory. I'm not sure the old amino acids. Here is one Prader syndrome, which is placed polyactively. Now, those are founder effects. This is a bottleneck. Being allowed. I don't know if you recognize here Australia, Papua New Guinea. This is a teeny tiny atoll in Micronesia. A population of 1.8 square kilometers. This will be what 10% the size of the city of Curitiba, even 1.8. That's really tight. In 1775, a typhoon devastated the island, leaving only 20 survivors, who are the ancestors of most of the current population. 10% of the current population of Bingala suffers from chromatopsia or total color blindness. A genetic disease that in other Pacific islands affects only 1 in 33,000 people. So, and I think it's also known the name of the survivor who gave the rest a chromatopsia. And this was written up quite nicely. It's a book that I would hardly recommend. The Island of the Colorblind by Oliver Sacks. That's what I'm thinking about. Maybe some of you have seen the movie Awakenings with Robert De Niro playing a man affected by some neurodegenerative disease, and the doctor and his neurologist is actually the character is based on Dr. Oliver Sacks, who was a brilliant neurologist and an even better science disseminator. His books are really lovely readings. So, moving on. Gene flow questions before we move on to gene flow. Okay. So, moving on. You know that the Italians and in part the Spanish, we have many different names for the proportions for the resulting beverage when you mix in different proportions of in milk. In Spain, we have 4 or 5 degrees from leche manchada, café con leche, cortado, café. So this is, and of course, the resulting beverage has different color from whitish to blackish. So this is a visual illustration of gene flow, and we have 2 features we have to take into account before we discuss gene flow or migration in genetic terms. Is that it has to result from a combination from the mixing of genetically different populations. If I don't know, I come from town in Catalonia, we mix with the people from the next town. The results are genetically irrelevant because we were genetically identical in the first place. We can talk about migration in that case, but that's no measurable gene flow. And it has to represent a non-decimal fraction of individuals. If one individual from a genetically different population comes to live in a population of 1 million, he or she will really not contribute to the composition of the following generations of the population. That fraction of migrants is called M. And it might result, and it has well, not exactly similar effects, but in the end it's relatively similar, whether it comes in a single pulse or it's spread over many generations. What counts is the total number of migrants be then concentrated in a short time or spread time. So here we have again you can recognize pictures, illustrations. We have the blue and the red population mixing. Here we have W. From each line here represents a chromosome. This would be chromosome 1 of one individual, chromosome 1 of another individual, and so on and so forth. W coming from the blue population, 1 minus W coming from the red population. And they start mating with one another. So when you have them recombination, you will see that in the following generations you have these blocks of red and blue. And recombination will break them up. So through time, you will see that the blue and the red fragments become shorter and shorter and shorter. When we model flow, a parameter that's used to estimate when gene flow happens is exactly that, the length of the tracks that come from one population or the other. And we can do that only if the source populations still exist. If we have to, if in some other place there's a blue population, called the Smurfs, and in another place there's the red population. And then we can compare these genomes with the original genomes if they still exist, and paint them blue or red, blue or red. And this is done quite frequently. For instance, you have here is the genome of one African American individual, and by comparing this genome to Africans and Europeans, we can see that they are homozygous for African ancestry for almost all these arm of chromosome 1, except this little bit here of European ancestry for which they are heterozygous. Heterozygous here. Here's a block in chromosome 5 of European ancestry, and you can have this done for you. Not you only as geneticists, but anyone in the general population can send their saliva and a check to companies such as 23andMe, and they will provide this result. Should I have paid for that? These are my results. Should I have paid for that, knowing that I used to live in the United States, and a typical conversation conversation at the party would be that everyone would talk about their family origins, and someone will say, "Oh, I'm half Italian, a quarter Jewish, and a ninth Norwegian, and a ninth Cherokee." I went, "Oh well, 7 of my 8 great-grandparents were born in a 10-kilometer radius, and the 8th was born just 50 kilometers away. I know where I come from. I understand that in many societies, people will have complex ancestries that they don't know about. But here, you see, is 82% this shade of blue. Oh, you can see this one, but it's 80% Spanish and Portuguese. They can even go. They can even go a little bit further down, and they can tell you you are most similar to our reference samples that come from Catalonia. Yeah, well, that's me. And at one time, it was literally me, because since I was one of the early adopters, and was about 10 years ago that I first sent my sample to them to 3andMe, I became part of the reference panel. And I knew that because when they first did that, I became 100% Spanish, right? Because they were comparing me with myself. So
you are the standard.
No, they realized that, and now they point to place 17% Northwestern European, French and German. That's quite common also in Catalonia, because people they don't know about that, because in the late 16th and early 17th century there were these religion wars in France by the Protestants against the Catholics, and this generated unrest and trouble, and there was quite a large migration from southern France to Spain, particularly to Catalonia, Valencia, and those parts. And that and we are talking about the newcomers were about a quarter of the total population. So anyway, there are much more interesting things that's my particular genome, and with that we can do quite cool things. This distribution should be random. If you have an mixed population, and that's I don't know, 70% red and 30% blue, you would expect, when you average that across individuals, across genomes, that a particular chromosome segment would be, on average, 70% red, 30% blue. There might be deviations for that. For instance, another cool thing, the reference populations need not be living. Here, they are comparing things, Europeans in general, to Mesolithic versus Neolithic ancestry. And they use as reference ancient genomes extracted from individuals who left their remains in Mesolithic or Neolithic archaeological sites. And there's, of course, this 70-30% that I was mentioning has, of course, a statistical error. There's a random, there might be some random fluctuations, and these are here in gray. And blue is excess Mesolithic ancestry, and in red is excess Neolithic ancestry. So, current Europeans got the HLA-E from their pre-Neolithic hunter-gatherer ancestors, and this gene SLC24A5, anyone knows about this? Skin color. This is the variants that sort of lighten your skin are really recent in Europe. We are talking just 8,000-10,000 years. Our ancestors in Europe had our pre-Neolithic ancestors had skins that were much darker than ours. You can do the same thing in Brazil. And then, and you can test throughout the genome for excesses in European, African, or Native American ancestors. And our colleagues at USP did that and found here in chromosome 7 or 8 this spike of significant excess 8 here of Native American ancestry. And the sample, if you ask, it comes from Campinas, SP, from the state of Sao Paulo. So, and they using exome sequencing, they could narrow down this area of excess Native American ancestry that contains a number of genes that are related to diet and metabolic traits. And this suggests that positive selection may have occurred due to the restrictive diet environment and severe famine periods in early admixtures in individuals. And of course, once you are adapted to not eating that often, and then you eat too much, then you get type 2 diabetes, effects on insulin secretion, you get peace, and so on and so forth. So, and actually,
So,
even
yes,
sure.
so it represents the peak, it showed us in the former graph
Yes,
of Native American ancestry.
yes,
So the Native Americans are adapted for low food supply.
Yeah.
Okay.
that's their interpretation, and I would refer you to the original papers, and they explain this much better than I can do. Yeah.
And since when we start adopting our way of eating the Occidental culture food, then we start diabetic and all of so.
Yeah, it's quite often the case, and in native populations, for instance, there's the famous case, the Bima, who live across the border between the US and Mexico. The US Bima are much heavier than the Mexican Bima. And you have also world records for obesity and type 2 diabetes in Polynesia. And
It's the same region for those in Polynesia?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm talking here just all the phenotype, not the I don't know on the genetic basis. Following the vein of I can imagine, for instance, if you live in an isolated island in Polynesia, there's no way to compensate to trade when your food supply fails. If the food comes and lets waste to your crops, you go hungry. And the current population might be the survivors of those famines. If you live inside the continent, you have extensive trade networks. Sometimes you can buffer these events. Oops, question behind?
I'm accessing this article because I wanted to ask about the methodology, the program used for, and I wanted to know that if it was local ancestry algorithms or like admixture in general. That's because like the portion of the genome that is more from an ancestry or another, because admixture give us the proportion overall, the exome or genome.
Yeah, it's of course the significance of this is tested against the overall proportion on the genome. It's in the sense it's in the sense that's called local classification. That's fine. If you have, I don't know, 10% overall mega analysis, and the point that's 50%. Well, if you do the number of points that that's significant, that's your single level. So it's yeah, I can't remember how this was done, but in general, the concept is this of local LAD of local analysis simplification. And I discovered that I should say I rediscovered, much to my shame, this is what I started in memory, but I read this paper recently because that student of ours cited it in relation to one particular gene that's in this region that's been associated with preference for spicy food. And I should have known about this because Rodrigo Secolin a few years ago was in our group, and he may explain about this. And anyways. So I won't go again about how we can detect sex-specific demographic effects, mostly with the Y chromosome and methylation. So the general effects is that migration tends to increase diversity within populations, measured as heterozygosity. It tends to bring new alleles and to increase heterozygosity, and decreases differentiation between populations. If two populations exchange migrants, their genetic difference will decrease. And we usually measure genetic differences with FST, which is just a sophisticated subtraction of allele frequencies. So I have reviewed many papers in my scientific scientific career, and that's something that I don't know if I should say that it gives me pleasure. Okay, yeah, I have something to say. Whenever I see human genetic diversity, even particularly at the local scale, represented as a tree. Because migration is so pervasive now and for centuries and for millennia, but a tree is not a tree in which you have bifurcating branches that isolate from one another. That's not a particularly good representation of how human diversity works. We need, and we will say tomorrow, that there are statistical ways of connecting branches of that tree in a way that better represents how human genetic diversity was created. Now, isolated populations. These are small populations that exchange fewer migrants. And so this leads to reduced internal diversity and increased differentiation from other populations. And some of you may recognize the slide that comes next, because I used them last December when I appeared online in the Mennonites symposium. You know, I teach ecology. I believe in recycling. So here are my recycled slides. Sorry about that. We have many different sources of isolation that can be geographical, social, lifestyle, ecological, linguistic, religious. We have geographical isolation. Standard population 143 in the middle of nowhere in the South Atlantic. We have Pitcairn, population 47, again, the most isolated population in the world in the geographical sense. And in both cases, we know who the first settlers were. And then it's interesting to see, for instance, we have here this picture of English mountaineers of Levante, with Tahitian men and women. And it's interesting now to go back to the island and see how the different ancestors have fared. We have social isolation, and this is interesting because we have social class in the UK. It's well, of course, there's a stratification by social class in many societies, but the British, they mark their social class in their class dialects. Dialect is a bidimensional construction in England. You have geographical dialects, and you have really marked social class dialects. An English person can place you perfectly in the social scale with just a few sentences. Of course, we all non-native English speakers are automatically pariahs in that society, and tap on the shape of your house, whether it's an apartment, the cottage, the Dutch, semi-detached. That's a mark of social class. Which supermarket you do your grocery shopping? There are. Can't remember now off the top of my head. Of course, that exists everywhere, but in the UK it has become a cliche, like the market for supermarket goods. But of course, it's much worse than that in India, which is not just this case. It's just hundreds and hundreds of subcastes. And they will deny it, a lot will deny it, but they still work like that. And there's this sort of matchmaking site in India in which the subclass is perfectly specified, and you can use and you can filter potential mates by caste, also by income. You know, when you buy an apartment, go to a website and you specify the maximum price you want to pay. Yes, you can specify the lower income you want to build for a mate. Anyway, this of course is as important in isolation population subdivision to the extent that that prevents mating between individuals. And for instance, in India, it is known that particularly women can marry upscale. It's relatively tolerable for the marriages between an upper caste man and a lower caste woman, not the other way around. So this is, you have to take into account that, as I said yesterday, there's one thing called the social prescription, and then there's reality, which can be more complex. There's lifestyle isolation, particularly the case of hunter-gatherers who have complex relations, or sometimes not that much, with the local farmers, because these are just patches of isolated populations, like the ACTA in the Philippines. Speaking of exonyms, remember yesterday the Eskimos, the ACTA and other populations like they in the Philippines have a Spanish actually. The Philippines were a Spanish colony, and it's horrible. They are the Negritos. And in the Anglo-Saxon anthropological literature, until quite recently, they are referred by that name. And there's no good alternative to that. We may call them something like Southeast Asian hunter-gatherers. But there's no good name because collectively these populations don't have a name for themselves as a collective. That's the ACTA, that's the ACTA, that's the AETA, that's a number of populations that are really relatively independent from each other, that are similar in their lifestyles, but they don't have a collective name. And that's also the case for the Mbuti, for the Aka, for the Biaka, for the extant hunter-gatherers in equatorial Africa, which in the anthropological literature are called pygmies. And again, we don't like that name. And again, there's no internal collective name that will describe all of them because they are independent populations. But my point here is that they are isolated from farmers. Does linguistic isolation? Well, I guess that if you really understand and speak the same language with a mate, it's more likely that you will have children together. It's not strictly required, but it helps. And by itself, language, or as a general marker for a culture, it's quite often the case that linguistic boundaries tend to match genetic boundaries. And for instance, we have this linguistic isolate in northeastern, in North Spain and France. This is the Basque country, and it's a really different language. You can notice here that the words sound strange, but the syntax is also rather strange. So it's a bit like Viola, doing putting the verbs and the subjects in weird places. They have. I don't know if any of you have studied Latin, and you know that they have 6 cases. Basque has 17 different cases. They do things like with, you say, you want to ask for coffee with milk, that would be café snearekin. Snea is milk, and the rekin at the end of it means with milk. So but it has a saving grace. The phonetics are exactly the same as that of Spanish. You recognize the sound when you speak in Spanish, but you don't understand a word. So then this relations like isolation, we have example here of the Mennonites and other Christian denominations, but also in some Islamic denominations, and then there are school religions that are relatively small. You may know that this guy, Farag Budsara, better known as Freddie Mercury, came from a Parsi family, from a Zoroastrian family, which are the remnants of were really old religion in was then Persia. They were persecuted by the Muslims and finished in northwest India, particularly around Bombay. But even within the major divisions of religions, there's been conflict and strife and situations. And for instance, I remember a documentary about the war in Yugoslavia. There were these Romeo and Juliet, Yugoslavian couple. He was Croatian and she was Serbian, or the other way around. And they only discovered that when they knew their surnames. But of course, it was like a big no-no that particularly in the 1990s, we were so names. So again, this is genetically relevant to the extent that these differences prevent people mating with one another. So actually, the populations have faster differentiation rates in neutron polymorphism. This is a remain of what I may have done in December that is spread out. Anyway, so we have, for instance, here the Asian and European populations, and you see some large blocks here. This European component, this Middle Eastern component, the East Asian here, and here the Kalash, which are an isolated population in Pakistan, are making a component all to themselves because they are so isolated and so differentiated. I'm not moving the pointer. This is a remnant of the presentation in December.
I was admired who's doing this. Look at the machines.
Parece uma aplicação. Oh, like it.
Yeah, no, it appears like I knew about that because I also see it in my computer.
I know.
Yeah. It's just weird. Anyway, so it's but of course we have faster differentiation in neutral markers, but also in these mutations. So we have in isolated populations we tend to have found mutations, but also I always say this: there are mutations that are common in the general population that isolation populations don't carry. We have to think them not as a cesspool of genetic deformities, but they are just different in their case. Did I mention that, for instance, the Roma, the Gypsies, don't have cystic fibrosis, and they get it from when they marry outside their community. So, and something that we see quite often in the genomes of individuals from isolated population are long runs of homozygosity. Since the mating pools in these communities tend to be smaller, it's more likely that you end up marrying a distant relative, and then in one part of it was pointing there. See, I might have been pointing to this consanguineous marriage and how they gave friends of homozygosity, like here, to their daughter. And we can quantify that, and we see that indeed isolated populations have more and longer runs of homozygosity. And as I mentioned last December, the world record for runs of homozygosity comes from the Caribbean, the adult population in the Amazon. So we have the world record in Brazil, at least for this set of populations. This is really distracting. So I'll move on, and that was actually my last slide of this block. So questions? Sorry, about the question.
We have yesterday we're working with exomas.
Yeah.
And we're working now with population of Panama, which is seemingly more of European descent, but we are questioning to which ancestral populations we should compare when there is the admixture operations. Because I have tried using more ancestral populations, European, African, Native Americans, the ones that are in other genomes, so they're recent, and East Asian. But then East Asian was just something very faint because Papua doesn't have a very large Asian population. So we have seen other projects in Brazil compared to Iberian and specific African groups and other ancestry populations.
Yeah, here my advice would be go step by step. First, use large references, broad references. If you end up with, I don't know, that 90% are European, then you may try to dig deeper there and compare, I don't know. There's IBS in the in 1,000 genomes. For historical and cultural reasons, we don't have good references for German populations. We don't have good references for German populations. In Germany, population genetics is a big taboo. The guy named Adolf that. Actually, we joke often with my colleague David Meyer, who's from Rio Grande do Sul, that probably the best place in the world to work with German population genetics is in Brazil. Yeah, because here that doesn't exist. I was thinking in HGTP, something that's politically not very good. You have a Russian reference, which is sort of the Ukrainian contribution to Paraná. But go step by step. That would be enough. And it's always better if you have a hypothesis than just going on a fishing expedition. I see quite often papers in which they compare their population with the rest of the world and they say why? Do you expect, I don't know, to have in Scotland someone of Papua New Guinean ancestry? So it's always better if you have a hypothesis first. There was question in front.
My question was kind of similar to this, and almost answered.
Okay. More questions?
Colin, your works on long runs of homozygosity, in my opinion, are particularly interesting also to check for associations in some phenotypes. And a student of mine, she made experience with PhD. She was in Erasmus University, and they worked on long runs of homozygosity of a very isolated population and Dutch ancestry, and they knew all the genealogical records of this isolated group. And they also evaluated the G coefficient of the intelligence, and they found of cognition, and they found that some long runs are associated with really high intelligence, and Another group of non-chromosomal diversity are associated with intellectual deficiency. But then you have a big region, where you lost diversity, and you have to check for the sequence.
Yeah. In principle, which region of the genome counts as homozygote is something that's randomly distributed between individuals. If there's a region where homozygosity is concentrated, that's usually the result of inversions that will then inhibit recombination. And that's a possible mechanism that can explain a phenotypic effect. Because if branches of homozygosity are different in one individual from the next, you wouldn't expect, even if they are long in both cases, you wouldn't expect that they will see a phenotype. Of course, there are there's this new paradigm now of the omnigenic phenotypic determination. For instance, in height, there are genes for height or alleles for height all through the genome. So this is, I'm just improvising here, but I can imagine that if this is the case for cognitive ability, then you may expect a phenotypic effect if you have, in general, longer bands of homozygosity. But it's conditional that on the phenotype being spread all through the genome. Okay. Great. Yeah. 15 minutes, is that enough? Back at the quarter to 4.
Então, eu vou parar a gravação. Isso, melhor, né? Eu achei que tentar de coisa. 15 para as 4 a gente volta.